I'm really delighted to have you with us today. I've been teaching at Penn for 39 years, and so I may have taught some of you, and I'm glad to see you again. I'm going to tell you about the history of this university through its architecture. The architect Augustus Welby Northmore Pugin, wouldn't you love to have that as a name, who was one of the architects who rebuilt the Houses of Parliament in London after a fire destroyed them in the 1830s. Pugin wrote in 1843 that the history of architecture is the history of the world, which sounds like a kind of self-aggrandizing thing that you might say if your profession happened to be architecture. But really, as you think about it, it is what architecture is. It is a record of what people do. It's a record of their strivings, their aspirations, and their accomplishments. And when you look at the architecture of a university, you look at its history, written in stones. And so we're going to look at that. We'll be focusing today on the West Philadelphia campus that Penn built for itself between the 1870s and the Depression of 1929. So we're going to start with some basic facts. Who was the founder of the University of Pennsylvania? Benjamin Franklin. And when was the University of Pennsylvania founded? 1740. When did Benjamin Franklin write his proposal concerning the education of youth in Pennsylvania? 49. There's a problem there. There is a problem, and that problem can be solved with architecture. In 1740, the citizens of Philadelphia built a large preaching hall, kind of a gospel house for the Reverend George Whitefield, who was an itinerant Methodist preacher. And the Philadelphians wanted to convince him to stay in Philadelphia, so they built a big, flashy building for him at 4th and Arch Street. The architect was Edmund Woolley. You know what else Edmund Woolley designed? Independence Hall. Whitefield did not stay. He left. And he left Philadelphians with a white elephant. And Benjamin Franklin, who was a committeeman, who was on every public-spirited committee in Philadelphia, Franklin was on the committee that was set up to take care of this derelict building. And it sat there, and it sat there, and it sat there, until Franklin made a proposal in 1749, which finally began to be implemented in 1752. That's when the first students arrived. And in 1755, the College of Philadelphia was chartered. So the only thing that ties us to 1740 is the secondhand building that your alma mater and my employer acquired as its first home. Franklin inserted his institution into the cheapest real estate he could find, which at that time was on the edge of the city, on the northern outskirts of the city. Penn prospered somewhat, grew, and in the 1760s they built a dormitory. And it was designed by Robert Smith. Any idea what Robert Smith else he designed? Carpenter's Hall. So here is some authentic colonial architecture that Penn used to own. We don't anymore. There's a Holiday Inn on the site of the campus. That's because, as you probably know, in the 1790s, after the ratification of the Constitution in 1789 and a brief period of time in New York City, the government of the United States located itself in Philadelphia to wait until the capital city in Washington was ready for occupancy in 1800. So in the 1790s, the US government was here in Philadelphia, and the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, or its leading citizens, undertook to try to bribe the government into staying. Some of you, can someone come forward and, sir, can you come forward and read this stone?
This cornerstone of the house to accommodate the President of the United States was laid May 10th, 1792, when Pennsylvania was happily out of debt.
We built a house on 9th Street, which was like beyond the edge of the city. The real estate was very cheap. And we invited first George Washington and then John Adams to live in it. These were gentlemen who knew a bribe when they saw one and did not accept it. And so the building stood derelict. Penn because their neighborhood at 4th and Arch had now become rather crowded, was looking to find some cheap real estate elsewhere. And so they acquired the president's house, which was probably the grandest federal-style house in America at that time, the grandest house. And if the presidents had moved in, of course, into a brick house, it would have been the red house, but we'll pass over that. And we bought it, and we modified it. We hired Benjamin Henry Latrobe, who was at that time also busy designing the US Capitol building, or redesigning it, to add a wing for the medical school. And we sort of made do in a big house until the 1820s, when the trustees of the university, because Penn had by this time renamed itself a university, the trustees of the university decided that they needed specialized buildings. So they undertook to tear down the president's house and the annex for the medical school and to build 2 all-new buildings. And to do that, they hired William Strickland, a great Greek revival architect. If you know the Second Bank of the United States or the Merchants Exchange in Philadelphia, you know those buildings, which are made out of marble and have freestanding columns. And you look at these buildings that Penn built out on 9th Street, and you think, what did we say to William Strickland that made it turn out so badly? And what we said was, you know, we don't have much money, and we'd like you to reuse the pilasters that are on the president's house on these 2 buildings. And you'll see that there are 8 pilasters on the president's house, and each of the new buildings, we want you to sort of spread them out over these 2 buildings, and build them of brick too, please. By the time of the Civil War, Philadelphia was the largest manufacturing city in the United States. We were no longer the capital of the nation, of course. We were no longer the largest city. We lost both of those at about 1800. But we were America's largest manufacturing center, probably the largest manufacturing center in the world. And that was the power, the physical power that won the Civil War. The Civil War may have been fought about ideas about freedom and national unity that were created in Philadelphia too, but it was won with the iron ships and the railroad technology and the manufacturing of clothing that occurred in Philadelphia. Philadelphia won the Civil War. And after the Civil War, Penn decided to move out of its center city home. We're going to go downstairs and continue the story outside, but just before we go, we're sitting in one of the first buildings that Penn built when it came to West Philadelphia, in College Hall, in the room that was the chapel when the university opened here.